Good afternoon. Thank you. So, I heard that it was Marshall's birthday yesterday, 84 years old, and is the person that conceptualized this work that will be presented by Thomas from Marshall Day, which is the full name of the company. So, we are very pleased to have you all here. I'm very pleased to have Thomas to come and give this talk. It's very inspiring to see how a great collaboration between various parties can lead to such a project. And I think that's what I retain when I see Thomas talk a few months ago. The fascinating relationship between the architect themselves and the clients to reach what's now one of the greatest concert halls in the world. It's not been an easy journey. He will explain all that, or you can squeeze in because there's a lot of stories we may not tell today in front of everyone. And I will leave the stage to Thomas, and then afterward we can have a Q&A session. There's some drinks after for those who would like to talk to each other or rather Thomas privately or semi-privately to talk about other things or have more questions. Thank you, Thomas. Maybe to you.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everyone. I'm not a public speaker, so forgive me my stuttering, and I'm not an English native either, so forgive my pronunciation. Our project is the Philharmonie of Paris. It opened in January 2015. So it's a brand new concert hall, and people are still discovering it, and orchestras are still discovering it. Although it's, just a quick word about us. We're Marshall Day Acoustics. We are an Australian, New Zealand owned company, and we started 35 years ago. When you design concert halls, you quickly have built all the concert halls there are to build in your own country, so you have to expand and go somewhere else. So we slowly working our way around the globe. We have 3 offices in the region. Offices is a big word, but I started the Hong Kong office 3 years ago, and there's now 5 of us in the overall team. There's 3 of us in the office today. It's not a large firm. It's only 90 people, but it actually makes us the largest one of the largest in the world, maybe the 2nd largest in the world, because that's all we do. We just take care of sound and noise. And so you can see the trail of our project is just following where the offices are going, or more likely the offices are going where the projects are. These are a few trademarks of our portfolio. This is the closest that you've got here that is worth looking, is the Guangzhou Opera House, which Zaha did. So this was the very first one of the firm that opened in 1972. It was built for 8 million Hong Kong dollars in New Zealand, Christchurch, New Zealand. Xi'an Concert Hall in mainland, Perth Theatre, Auckland, New Zealand, and Sydney. We also look at productions, post-productions, recording studios, and the like. And that represents about 20 to 25% of our business, and the rest of our people are looking at art galleries, university buildings, hospitals, stadia. So it's a broad range, but all we do is sound and vibration, but also theatre planning. So how does the set move up and down on the stage, etc. How do you make the magic of theatre happen? So back to the Philharmonie. Project opened in 15th of January. This is the building of the Philharmonie of Paris. Built. This is not a render, and that's the view you see when you get out of the subway in Paris. It is right next to an existing music center that has two rooms, 2 halls, and is very much linked to the Conservatorium of Paris, which is literally right behind the camera, the photographer. It is set in a large park in Paris. The north is this way, west is this way. This is the big ring road around Paris. So we're very much at the boundary of the Paris. And this new concert hall was pretty controversial because the Paris Orchestra used to play in Salle Pleyel in the very heart of Paris. And it was in the poshest part of Paris. And the audience for classical music, in particular symphony, is not of my age. It's actually not of anyone's age in this room. It tends to be a lot older. And they had to go and now take the subway or take a taxi and go all the way to the edge of the popular Paris, of the posh Paris, and get to the boundary of what are social housing here. And if you read the news once in a while, you can see giant riots and things like that. Social housing in Paris or in France hasn't been a very successful adventure, and they have problems. So someone in 35 years ago decided that we should have a concert hall in that spot. And that spot is that car park here. This is this building associated with the conservatorium that is right here. There's a large exhibition space, the Grand Hall it's called, Museum of Science, an inflatable rock venue, which was a temporary structure. The roof structure is a blow-up roof. It was built for 8 years, and 30 years down the track, it is the most lucrative venue in Paris, and so no one bothered taking it down. And right here on the spot is the park. The park was designed by a landscape architect called Chumi, who decided that rather than putting, like you will probably do in Hong Kong, putting all the services for the park on a big common basement, he decided to distribute it around the park. And instead of having a big concrete bunker with ties all over, he's designed these little structures here. And so there's a whole series of structure on a perfect grid. These red structures they call follies. They've become very popular. There's quite a number of them, and they all are different. And some of them house plant transformers, electrical transformers, but some of them are cafes, some of them are just structure, etc. And if you go back to the site, you can see there's one here that is kind of in the middle of the site, and there's another one behind that tower. So one of the challenge was to design a building that is literally, I think it's 46,000 square meter, without moving these structures that everyone really likes in Paris. The design competition started in 2006. There was first a competition for who wants to write the brief. And the brief was written by an architect and an acoustician. There was no theatre planner in the brief, and they wrote a brief which is about that thick. And then came the architectural competition. The first stage of it was open competition, so they received 97 submissions, and they narrow it down to 6. You will know or have heard of all the names of these 6. In December 2006, we received a phone call from in the office of New Zealand, like a long way down from Paris. And it was the office of Jean Nouvel asking us if we wanted to tender with him. So we start looking at the brief. And the brief really was asking the design team to answer a real challenge. The concert hall had to have 2,400 seats, and it was meant to be primary for symphonic music. But they also requested that we could increase the capacity for world music, jazz, rock, heavy metal, rap, hip hop, dance, organ music, musicals, the whole lot. It was to be the home of 5 resident orchestra. Now the Orchestra of Paris is 130 staff, including musicians. And then you narrow it down. At the end, you do have 500 staff working day and every day in it. So it had to be quite a big thing. An orchestra has 3 or 4 trucks load of equipment, a program, staff for ticketing, staff for programming, artistic directions, etc. And all of these, they don't want to share storage. So the building was growing. You need to house 5 different orchestras within one building. It's like a giant headquarters. It had to have an education wing because the music conservatory was growing. It had to include a cultural program associated with the museum that has one of the largest collections of music instruments and does a lot of world music concerts. Exhibition and libraries. The program for the building said it has to be open to the north suburbs. So do you remember how the site is run at the edge? You couldn't turn your back to the people living outside of Paris. You had to create a bridge between the social housing and the posh Paris. And this is a challenge, and it's not a challenge, it's a challenge for any building, but it's even more a challenge when you're actually trying to sell tickets for classical music. It had to be obviously open to the park, and it had to be open to the public and families. It had to be safe. You had to be able to have 300, 400 children playing around in the building. And the tiny little thing here, it says you had to create the new audience. So just in case the people did not move from the old South Playa in central 16th arrondissement of Paris, you had to survive. And that means you had to bring people from the northwest, east suburbs of Paris that probably have never been to a classical concert. So quite a big project, and at the end it's a 93,000 square meter project. That was the brief for the architecture part. The brief for the acoustic was 65 pages long. This is the 60th concert hall that our firm designed. It's the first time we have a brief that is 65 pages just for the acoustics. And they clearly, these are quotes, best acoustic to rival the Berlin Philharmonie, the Vienna Musikverein and the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. There's only one more concert hall you could put on the list, and it's the Boston Symphony Hall, and then you have the 4 big best concert halls in the world. And the brief said you have to be among them. No pressure. And then they said you had to be independent to control of reverberation and clarity. Just quickly, clarity is how you hear the definitions and the hard work in the music. You hear every beat when the violinist is just playing very subtle. You hear it clearly. The reverberation is what you hear when you're in a cathedral. It's the ample, large, warm sound that doesn't die right away, that accompanies the musical phrase. And for a very long time, all the acousticians have believed that you could not have one or the other. The reverberation is the cathedral. The clarity is the recording studio. It's your bedroom. It's the very soft spaces. How can you have both at the same time, happening at the same time, serving the music? That was a challenge. Especially in Hong Kong and in the region, this does not really happen all the time. It's that the acoustic solution of the design has to be inherent to the architectural design. And that really means that you do not build a building, build a room, and then clip on some acoustic panels and some absorption and some things. It has to be fully integrated. And finally, probably the biggest challenge is it had to be a very different typology of room. So nothing like you've seen before. I don't want a shoebox. I don't want something that looks like any concert hall that has ever been done before. So that was a challenge. And it had a whole bunch of numbers that defines the acoustic quality of a concert hall as you measure it with science. And this is the longest list we've ever seen for a concert hall. So, 2 people got together. This is Jean Nouvel, the architect, and this is Errol Marshall, the Marshall in our Marshall Day Acoustics. And they got together because Jean Nouvel called us. Jean Nouvel Errol had done mini concert hall. That was his second concert hall in Christchurch. Had been regarded as one of the most successful concert halls from an acoustic point of view. Very intimate. This is the photo taken from the furthest seat from the stage, and you have 2,700 seats in that concert hall. So it's actually bigger than the Hong Kong Cultural Center concert hall by 350 seats. And this is the furthest you are, so a very intimate space. This is where Harold was coming from. Jean Nouvel had just done Lucerne in Switzerland, and this is what he was coming from. So from an architectural and design point of view, there's two very different approaches. And just to make sure that things got a little bit complicated, is Harold Marshall, before being an acoustician, also was an architect. So the dialogue was always going to be an interesting one. I fast-track all the pain and we open and it's a great success. This is the building in January. It looks finished. I'm coming from the northeast suburbs. I've got a way to get there. Go into the lobby, queue to go and see David Bowie exhibition. Got inside, polished concrete, floor, walls, ceilings. This is the first day of opening. And for those who are aware of classical music and who go to a classical concert, you can be pretty sure that unlike an airline, there's always an empty seat next to you. You know? It's never sold out, or very few sold out. This is quite an interesting photo. I'm really happy about that photo. There's actually a very long queue of 10,000 people queuing to get inside. So that project was actually pretty popular in the media every day for good and bad reasons. More photos of the foyer. This is on the opening. You can see there's a little bit of cladding missing, but overall it's still an operational building. Some of that cladding here was not finished. And so the controversy that you might have heard from Jean Nouvel being very unhappy about the condition of the building on the opening comes from this consideration. The facade is made of birds. If we ask Jean Nouvel if it's an homage to Escher birds, he says, no, this is my design. And it's okay. There's about 364,000 of these birds. They're all made in metal, aluminum, and they've all been welded one by one by someone. It was a fascinating job. The foyers on the opening, very simple, except for these hanging things. Again, there was a guy whose job was to take every one of these pieces of metal and hang them one by one. It's about 20,000 square meters of foyer. So yeah, it was a bit late, but you know, some of the detail is interesting, and some of the detail actually took a long time to just implement. It has rehearsal rooms for the resident orchestra. This is the Orchestra of Paris doing a rehearsal. This photo was actually taken about a week before the opening, and the concert hall was not available, so they would just stick to the rehearsal room for now. Smaller rehearsal rooms. The education wing offices and offices of the staff. So there's about 3 levels like that, just to house all the people. And these are photos of some of the workshop that they organize for kids. And so, you know, part of it is trying to say classical music to that new audience. And there's no better way of just saying, okay, every Sunday, anyone can drop your kid on Sunday morning and you come and pick them up at 5 o'clock, and all day they're just going to learn to play instruments, try different instruments, just go around or sing or just do things like that, and it's all subsidized. So you know, you just put your name down and off you go. So you know, kindergarten subsidies as part of the project, but something interesting. So someone dropped Grandpa there, didn't they? Why not? It's good. And that's the concert hall as it's finished on the day of the opening. The pre-opening concert. Pre-opening concert is where you invite everyone who worked on the job and their family, so that they got something to show their family, because they've worked day and night for the last 6 months, haven't seen them. It's about the opportunity for the families to understand what everyone was about for years. But it's the great time, it's the first time, it's not ticketed, it's before the opening, there's no media. You know, if there's a problem with the toilets and they get blocked, it's the day you want to try and test these systems. It's not when you've got all the medias of the world looking at you and saying, oh, the toilets are broken. So, going back to the design, how did we get there? Well, when Harold Marshall and the team arrived in Paris for the first meeting, Jean Nouvel was in the hospital having a back operation. And so we were greeted at the airport by some of his team who said, I'm sorry, Jean Nouvel is not available. I'm sorry, you flew all the way to New Zealand, 5 of you, and he's not there. But don't worry, he's got a sketch. Here we go, that was the sketch. Literally, that's what it was, I'm not joking. So, okay, cool. Done. But no, we also had all the pictures. We had pictures that were generated by Jean that actually just explained the feel he wanted in the space. And they had been computer generated with some of his teams. And they don't look at all like a concert hall, but they actually give you that aerial feel and that little extra bit to try to understand which direction we're going to go. What's the experience and the feel that you want at the end? Because we acousticians, we want to shape the room to some extent. So it's really important that from the day one, we actually understand not just the architectural concept, but the end result, which is a human feeling. And they've managed to actually give us a little picture that actually speaks quite a lot and spoke a lot to us. And over the weeks, things started taking shapes a little bit more. You could see this starts to look like a little concert hall. And we started to have a little bit more of an understanding of where it was going. We didn't do anything at this stage. We're not doing anything. We're just looking at it, understanding it, asking questions, making sure that we really understand where he's coming from. And we send him things as well at the same time, so he understands where we're going. And one of the things is that this is a sketch. This is a sketch there's 2 pens because there was Jean Nouvel and Harold Marshall drawing on that piece of paper. It's actually a scan of a tablecloth during a lunch. And I'm literally not kidding. This is a section, there's a stage, up a little bit of a choir and some shape of the ceiling and some additional things. This is a long section. Then here you have a plan view. A little space surrounding a stage and a larger space all around. Okay? And here's the plan view. And the plan view shows a concert hall that is not symmetrical. Okay? It's very conceptual. Now, symmetry is an interesting topic. It was introduced from day one. The asymmetry was introduced from day one. Often concert halls are symmetrical. Theatres are all symmetrical. The main reason that you could think of today, or at least I can think of today, to go systematically symmetrical is the perspective from the stage. So the dancer or the performance knows where the middle line is, especially a dancer that has to speak and remember where to face the audience. But for a concert hall, the only reason really is so that you don't have to design 2 different buildings. One for the left-hand side, one for the right. Once you've documented one side, you just mirror everything. And then only the builder has to do it twice. If you think about an orchestra on the stage, you have violins on one side, cellos on the other. The drums on one side, and then another percussion instrument on the other side. It's not symmetrical. One's facing that way, conductors here, the other one's facing the other way, conductors here. And the sound of every instrument radiates in very different directions. So the only reason why you go symmetrical is just the design But if your design intent is to try to do something not symmetrical, there's no acoustic reason to go to reject asymmetry as a possibility. Okay? Even in a very symmetrical concert hall, with one instrument sitting bang on the middle line, for you to have a symmetrical experience, you have to be the guy who's sitting in the middle seat. Because every time if you're not sitting in the middle of the row, you're always closer to a wall that reflects sound. So your experience is not symmetrical at all. And so that was introduced, and Jean Nouvel really liked the possibility of going asymmetric. So we went, here we go. Now the real solution was to nest an intimate chamber within a larger volume. I'm going back to my little sketch. Here's my intimate chamber, here's my bigger volume. What does that mean acoustically? Acoustically means that some of that volume will have surfaces that can reflect sound and reflections that go to the audience. These contribute a lot to the clarity. And then some of the sound will actually escape and go into that bigger chamber outside and build up a reverberation like a cathedral. And that sound will percolate back to the people. And so you could slightly change the geometry of the red curve, you will affect the clarity. You can optimize and maximize the clarity. And then you could change the volume between the two curves by moving the blue line, and then you can change the reverberation. And so that's how you end up with a high clarity and long reverberation. And that concept is not something that can be achieved as if, as an architect, Jean Nouvel had said, here's my building, make it work. It was way before computer model was built, way before CAD drawing. You know, AutoCAD was not started yet. We didn't need a computer to resolve the main acoustic challenge of the concert hall. And that's what was submitted for the competition. A concert hall with a stage, stalls, what I've been called a queen balcony, which is a big element of asymmetry. A first balcony that surrounds the stage with an audience possibly sitting behind or a choir, and a second balcony that goes all the way around. These things are floating. They are actually not touching the orange wall. The orange wall is like an eggshell, and the audience is sitting in the yoke in the middle. And some of the sound is reflected off these surfaces there and contributes to that clarity. This was my red arrow in the previous slide. Some of the sound goes through in between, get lost in that big shell, and eventually comes back through the same holes back to the audience. So we've created the clarity and intimacy of the little studio and set it up inside the big cathedral. The side effect is that concert hall is actually 37% bigger in volume than any other concert hall that has been built for the same number of seats. Okay? But that doesn't matter. So the usual response about is the volume right, is the volume wrong, and you have an acoustician who says, well, it depends, and everyone says, I hate when someone says it depends, can you tell me if I'm right or wrong? It actually depends, and it depends on the overall concept of the room. That's why you need to get them on board early. This is the volume behind. You're walking on bridges. So when you enter the room, you are already within that giant shell. And that giant shell is the limit of the acoustic volume. This is where all the reverberation is. You can hear the music when you hear it. You cannot see it. You cannot see the orchestra. You're walking on that bridge, and then when you get the bridge, all of a sudden you're within that intimate space where only the audience is. This was the concept. And this is where we said, look, it doesn't look like any concert hall you ever had. It is new. Of course, you've seen it's turned to red. It's a cyclorama. Acoustically, we've never changed the shape of that cyclorama. We made sure the right volume was contained within that big eggshell, but we never touched the eggshell. It doesn't have any acoustic reflections involved. It is just there for the sound to build up. Because the source of sound sends sounds there, and it builds up with some reverberation that actually comes back. And it's that coming back that we're trying to optimize in the Paris concert hall. It's not something we can play after the opening, so we have to get it right from day one. And so part of it is that volume behind. Part of it is that volume above. Jean Nouvel wanted floating surfaces that create some sort of clouds in the surface. So we used these as well, and they define the boundary between the two volumes. Okay. So that, the view from the interior, they are here. It's a mess. It was not defined. It's not like, Jean had a fixed idea. He says, I want these things, and I need to design them with everyone else. So structural engineer came, and some of them are 160 square meters, and they're hanging above people. So it's not just an acoustic thing, it's also a structural thing, and a theatre planning thing, a scenography thing. All of these red surfaces we used to create these reflections, these red arrows. Every square meter of it had been orientated and designed so that the sound coming from the stage goes straight to one member of the audience, including these very large things. This is 200 square meter. It weighs 90 tons, and it's hanging above the orchestra. So you can't develop a new audience if you crush them, or if you crush the orchestra. How did we work with all of that? It was quite difficult, because obviously now you understand, if we make the balconies bigger, because they need to be bigger for architectural or building department things, you change the acoustics. If for acoustics reasons you want to make them smaller or bigger, you change also the architecture. And then you also change the structure. So how do you optimize all of that? You can't be just a back and forth. The typical work of acoustician had been, until then, acoustician has constraints. It says the room cannot be more than 24 meters wide. Then the architect works on a 3D model, sends the 3D model, the acoustician plug it in a computer, go have a coffee, comes back and said, doesn't work. Try again. But when you have a model like that, you just can't do it. It's not what, I cannot explain in 2D what I want to do. I really need to explain it in 3D. Talking about these simulations, in 2007, we plugged that concert hall into our computer to run a simulation. Our computer did, it takes the nice rendered Rhino model and just breaks it into, an 8-bit version. You've got facets, and it simplifies the geometry. That computer had 140,000 elements of surface, which doesn't sound very much to their standard, but in 2007 it was a big deal. And it took 24 days to get just one result. So the previous thing, when we receive the model and then we run it and get a feedback to the architect, we just can't work like that. It's 24 days, so I'm going to Bali in the meantime. You cannot do that. So we had to find another way, because we're in New Zealand, they're in France, they send us at 8 p.m. a new model. When it's 8 a.m. they want an answer. And then we have about 12 hours of our daytime to send an answer. So we had to work differently. And one way is saying, well, forget about these simulations. We don't always need to do a full simulations. We could work in the 3D model of Rhino and do some assessment. And that's exactly what we did. So we started by having one single design that is both architecture and acoustics. Then we had one model, and we directly worked in Rhino. Okay, and that's because of that project that I know Marc and Roberto. It's because we started working with Grasshopper when it came out in 2008. Because we actually started to say, okay, we're going to draw ourselves for the reflections. We're not going to let a software do it. We're going to draw it ourselves. And then we can bend the surface in Rhino and shoot the model back to Jean Nouvel. We don't do the simulations. We don't need to do them all the time. So that's an example. This one is 160 square meter-ish. It runs from the back of the choir all the way to the top of the second balcony. So it's about 42 meters long. And what we did is we started shooting sound to it from the stage. And we look at how the sound is reflected off that element. Now, it doesn't make really much sense when you've got a surface that is curved in 3D to do a whole surface. So we started picking it up. Right? We start breaking it up. But drawing all of these rays one by one is complicated, and that's when we started with the parametric, where this is very first few bits of Grasshopper, where we said, oh, well, we could start moving our reflector, and we'll see where our red dots, which are where the sound reflections reach the audience, end up. And we're going to start to make sure that every seat in the house has a little red dot. Obviously, you don't take a 160 square meter panel and just rotate it in one direction. We started breaking them up. And each part of it had a function, is to send reflections straight from the stage to a specific area of the audience. We had many of these surfaces all around, so we could make sure that every bit of area of the audience could get these reflections. This reflection is for the clarity we was talking about, the envelopment, but also the loudness. Remember, it's a very large volume, and the orchestra in a large volume doesn't play louder. They reach a point where an orchestra cannot play louder. So if you still want someone sitting here, 32 meters from the stage, if you want them to hear everything and hear the harp playing a quiet instrument, you have to make sure that the sound is actually reflected towards them, so they hear more of it, not just the sound that travels in a straight line from the instruments to the ears. And so by discretizing that, you can start tweaking, bending, twisting a simple element to make sure that you distribute these reflections to different zones of the audience. We did the same for the very large piece hanging above the orchestra. Its role is to send sound from the musician back to the same musician so he can hear himself when he plays, but also from one musician across the stage to another musician so he can actually hear the others. So you have reflections for yourself and reflections from the others. And if you don't have that, then the orchestra starts playing like a bunch of deaf guys. They don't hear the cues, because the cue is not all the conductor. The cue could be actually the guy who's doing the little ding at some point, and you know you're going to have to start playing. For the orchestra to play as a perfect ensemble, they need to hear each other, and they need to hear themselves. And so we could start playing with curvature as well. How much of it do we want? And at the end we settle for a specific curvature. This is in real time. If you think of Grasshopper, I just move a little cursor that says I want more curvature, less curvature. And if you can do that on Grasshopper, that means you can do it sitting next to the architect. And at some point, the architect says, "Oh, stop, it's ugly." So you go back, and then you say, "Oh no, I'm stopping because I don't get enough. It doesn't work. It's not good enough." So at some point, within literally 60 seconds of sitting next to the architect, you can resolve that design. End of story. You save that surface, and you know the architect's happy. It took 60 seconds to design that piece. And I didn't touch it for the next 6 years of the project. At these little red dots, we have heaps of parameters that allow actually me to pretend I'm smart next to Jean Nouvel when you're moving the cursor. I can zoom, I say sorry. I cheat. I look at all the numbers that Grasshopper is calculating. It's not just an intuitive thing, it's actually a science, acoustic. And at the end of the workshop, you have a new set of nuage, clouds. And that, as an acoustician, in the past, we had to describe it in text. How do I describe these changes in text on the phone, on Skype, to an architect? I can't. So it was very good that Jean Nouvel was willing to give the 3D model and say, change it, make it, change it. Tell me, send me back the model the way you'd like to see it, you'd like to have it. And he trusted us. When we started with these surfaces, it was a floor plan projection, like a reflected ceiling plan. They did not have the 3D curves. 3D curves were introduced for acoustic reasons. And we did that many times. It's a iterative process. And that's what they look like at the end. Right? They purely, the concept of floating surface was there. The footprint to sort of make sure the mass is not too excessive and that there's an aesthetic quality to it. And then the shaping of them was entirely left to us. And of course, sometimes he said, no, I don't like that one. And we went back and forth. But when you can do that in 60 seconds, you can go back and forth a lot more time than if you have 24 days of simulations to go through. And we did the same process for every bit of the walls that we read at the beginning. At the back of the balconies, we've got my red dots. This is what these walls look like now. Well, no, what they look like in January. These little blocks are diffusion, so they actually break the intensity of the reflection. Sometimes if you're sitting too close to that reflector, the sound will come to you direct, and then it would reflect on the wall. But if that reflection travels very short distance, it sounds as loud as the direct sound. And so that's how you realize at some point you hear the trombones coming from here instead of the stage. So to avoid that, we make these little surfaces that we call diffusion, and they just soften that reflections. They break a bit of that energy. They scattered some of that reflections to other directions. This is what they look like before it's finished, which is the steel structure. A part of the structure includes the angle that we wanted. And that steel structure was also in Grasshopper somewhere, and someone else was just working it out. Another example of them. This one has a little hat because it's the closest to the stage. And the little hat allows the sound to come, bounce here, keep shooting up, bounce on the hat, and go back to the musician. If you have a right angle, the sound will always go back to the guy who emitted the sound. So this is useful for the musician to hear himself. And then when you transit from the hat to a surface like that, architecturally you could start having a transition between the hat and a flat surface, and that's created some beautiful shapes. Same thing, these were architectural things that came out of the acoustic, which itself was coming out of the architectural design. So that's where that look goes fast, and that's where that design and the architecture gets defined. My little red dots, same thing, making sure everyone hears the guy who's sitting here and playing off these little surfaces. Now the next picture shows you where these surfaces are in the rear room, but here are recommendations sent to the architects. It's just a tilt angle of that surface. That surface here. You can see it's vertical here, and slowly it tilts forward. Okay? When you're in the room, you don't really realize that, and you think, oh, maybe it's just a nice, neat little architectural detail, but it's not. There's not a single square meter of that room that is arbitrary, either from an architectural or an acoustic point of view. It's actually the same thing in the project plan. So this is the stage. This is the stage on the opening night, the second opening night. Now, for rehearsals, Do you remember I said we have a very large volume, cathedral-like, in excess of 40,000 cubic meters, just in one volume? The building code in Hong Kong says when you reach 7,000, you have to separate it for fire safety. I don't know how we could deal with that here. But in France, apparently it's okay. Never mind. The orchestra comes and they play in rehearsal. You can see they're not wearing their usual frock. They're in jeans and they have their handbags and all that. It's a rehearsal. In a very large volume like that, the reverberation time, when you don't have the absorption of the people sitting, will be diabolical. A typical concert hall, like the Berlin Philharmonie or the Music Vereins, will have a reverberation time that would be between 1.8 seconds to 2.4, 2.2. And that's how long it takes for the sound to completely die. In the Paris Philharmonie, when you are unoccupied, when the orchestra is rehearsing, we have 3.2. 3.2 is what you hear in the cathedral, subjectively. So it's really hard for them to play if we don't have some form of putting some fake audience in the seats or something like that. The fake audience in the seat are banners that come down in that volume between the balconies and the shell. Do you remember that volume is dedicated to build up the reverberation? If we put the absorption in there, we prevent that reverberation from building up. And for the architects who work on theatres, I know there's a few here, banners is the worst enemy of the architect. Because it's just fabric against the wall. And it makes a beautiful architecture look like just a cinema room. No, it's fabric on the walls. Well, that little volume that we've created allows us to have banners that you don't actually really need to see. Yet the effect is quite drastic. Because by deploying these banners, we've measured the reverberation time from 3.2 when they are closed, and these things are closed and no one sees them, all the way down to 2.6. 2.6 is quite close to the target reverberation time that we were looking at of 2.4 when it's full of an audience. So it's a drastic effect, and the impact on the design, visual experience of the room is zero. There's no banners in the intimate space inside. And they move with machines and things like that, that theatre planners can design and specify. So they move on. These little doors are pneumatic systems, and there's someone with an iPad who said, I want a banner. And you just push a button and it comes down. Same thing, you don't have that if you don't get your theatre planner, like you acoustician, from day one on the project. You can't just give them a drawing and say, make it work. Of course, the concert hall, do you remember, they wanted hip hop and jazz and heavy metal and all that, so he has to work with sound systems. Here's just an example. We've got an orchestra and 5 singers that are actually amplified, and you can guess it's amplified because they've got little full-back loudspeakers on the stage that just feeds them back the sound in the room. This is not one example, I've got more extreme examples. So we also had to look at the effect of having loudspeakers hanging above and shooting on the walls. Not all our source of sound was always grounded on the stage. Sometimes the sound's coming from way up. If I have a microphone and I have a very large loudspeaker, it doesn't really matter how loud I speak, you're going to hear mostly the loudspeaker. And so that's where the sound comes from. And all these surfaces that I had shaped perfectly for rooms, natural symphonic music, could become tricks. And they could create echoes and rock reflections. So again, the parametric design has come into play. And this is why these surfaces here also have our little timber blocks. And they have that little angle. They're not just straight vertical. This is the concert hall as I discovered it on the 12th of December exactly 32 days before opening. I arrived in Paris to do measurements in the Finnish concert hall. But I couldn't, you see. There was no seats, there was no floor, there was no stage. There wasn't much. But there was a lot of people running around. Some stressed, some grumpy, some unhappy. Sorry, log slide. So, we had to calculate, and we couldn't do that many calculations because it took too long. So we did a lot of geometrical acoustics, and we had to make sure that that space between the balconies is the right one. If it was too small, we didn't send enough sound into the reverberant volume around. If it was too large, we were sending too much, and it'd be a real cathedral with no clarity. We had to get that right from the first time, because it's not like you can change that construction after opening. So the first model we did was polystyrene and Lego. And we had steam foil and a laser pointer, a little bit less sophisticated than that, sitting here and shooting sound there and seeing how it reflects to the people. That was the first model we made. See? Then we had a bigger model, a much bigger model. This is scale 1-1. These guys are about that tall. They have a little hat because we're trying to make them as absorptive as people with hair. It's not quite true. We should have picked a few because there's always someone with less hair than others, but statistically it's okay. And so it's 1 to 10. So the tall ceiling height in the rear room, which is 22 meters, stage to ceiling, is enough for me to actually stand up on the stage. Okay? So it's a big dollhouse. And what we do is we play sound through tiny loudspeakers. And we play sound that is ultrasound. And we have tiny microphones that pick up the ultrasound. And essentially we're simulating a measurement in the room. So this is how we actually, but in that room, it's much easier to vary the height between the balconies, close it and unclose it, with just perspex and duct tape. And so that's how we actually validated the 3D model. And it turns out we didn't change much out of that exercise. So the client used that model for great publicity and made stop motion movies and all sorts of things out of it. It was a great publicity stunt. So how's the vision survive? Well, this is the floor at the rear of the stalls, and this is the volume. You're inside the large volume. These are the cantilever bridges through which you walk. You can see a door, and this is the belly of the balconies. Okay. This is another view. You walk on the bridge, you're already in the space, and you walk on top of the first balcony. The stage is somewhere down there. Now we have doors here. Okay? So you have doors that are orientated like the proper part of the acoustic reflector with very complex systems so that they actually can open. But when we were doing these measurements, we didn't have the doors yet. And sometimes you don't have a door. You can see someone standing up here. And it's okay, because Jean Nouvel asked us where he could put gaps in his surfaces. And it's not an easy task, because if you put a door here, that means that's where the bridge is. And the bridge is the cantilever structure that holds the wall on. And so the structure guy had to follow the acoustic, and the acoustic had to work around the structural guy and the architect. None of it can be done without coordination. And it's not at the detailed design when you're doing the documentation when you actually re-change these things. Okay? For that project, we issued one version of our specification. Okay? In Hong Kong, it's 8, version 9, 10, update, redraw. On that project, it was one version, it's gone for tender. And that's it. So you had to get everything right from day one. And I think we did. This is the orchestra rehearsing. At the end, it was a bit chaos. They were very late, so the orchestra would squeeze in when the builders were out for lunch. They rehearsed for 2 hours, and then they'd bagger off. And someone will, at the beginning, someone was hoping to cover the beautiful seats with plastic so that the builders don't ruin the seats and the dust and the paints and all that. And at the end, the orchestra was very gracious and said, forget about it. We're just rehearsing, we know we're in a construction site. And there's no orchestra in the world except that Paris orchestra who agrees to that. These are very high-end professional musicians. You know, their violins are worth more than a 300 square foot apartment in Hong Kong. So the dust is very important, and they were very gracious. And finally was the hard hat concert. This is the day before the opening. You still have a scaffolding. You're missing 3 rows of seats. And you do a concert. And it was a good success. And this is the opening night. No, this is the opening night. This is the Berlin Philharmonie coming. This is the opening night. Here we go. So, a few numbers. These reflectors that were suspended, there's 630 square meters of them. They weigh about 50 kilograms per square meter of timber, and then there's a huge structure above to support them, and the lighting and all that. There's 800 meters of walls all around, and there's 38,000 cubic meters. Yeah, it's not per seat, it's in total. Between 16 cubic meters per seat, which is on the much bigger side for symphony music, where you usually target about 11, 12. So these are members. Acoustics, they don't really speak too much, but the last part of it is how did we do rock concerts in there? Because you haven't seen any rock concert, I've just shown nice orchestras. Rock concerts, this is how the room can transform. So that's why it was late, because that room is not just the room, it's actually a robot. I don't know if you realize here, but there's no seat and there's no stage. There's no choir sitting. And then all of a sudden, something has popped down from the sky to make a concert hall. Here we go. The stalls, normal sitting, becomes flat. All flat. And reveals the level underneath, where you can have a standing audience. This is how we got from 2,400 seats to 3,600 seats. We didn't have seats, we just told people to stand up. And then the choir has disappeared, and you can rig a rock stage. People are actually standing on the concert platform. You just roll the carpets and they can stand. You can do all sorts of different configurations. Thanks to machinery that look like that. This is the entire choir, 600 seats moving down. This is the stalls disappearing. Coming down. The choir moving down now. Okay? There's a lot of engineering in there, and that's the architect. I didn't mean to have his face at the end of the photo, but I think I feel bad about cutting him off now. So. There's a lot of engineering in that concert hall, and the choir seats retract, leaving a flat floor that you could lower down to a rock stage level. And at the end, you go from the symphony concert hall to a rock stage concert. And you don't forget to deploy the banners in the bigger outside volume, otherwise the sound system is not going to cope with a very long reverberation. This is what he looks like. The big reflectors hoisted all the way up to the floor, trap in the ceiling comes down with lighting bars and the sound systems, drapes on the side, drapes in the back, bring chairs or not. If people to come here for something else, something they're used to, and then while they're here, they're going to be exposed to the classical music, and they're going to discover things. And maybe they realize at that time that, you know, when they get the brochure, that they could drop their kid on Sunday. It's a big deal. Have a Sunday for yourself, where someone's learning music. So without all that flexibility, you could start staging even classical music in some strange ways, where you have an harp in the middle of the audience, a piano. There's a piano here. This is the first balcony. There are seats underneath that piano. And you can start doing interesting things. Or you could just play music to a movie projection. In 6 months after the opening, which is the reason why it got a little bit tense at the end, they had 270 concerts in 6 months. 95% sold out. Probably because they spend the biggest amount of money in bringing Dudamel and Simon Rattle, Los Angeles, Berlin, Music Verein Orchestra, Concert Gibbon Orchestra, Boston. They brought everyone in the first 6 months. And they brought some rock concerts too, and some Indian reggae nights. And I think they're planning to have Daft Punk in 2016. So that'll be fun. Anyway, I was talking about acoustics. At the end, we've done our measurements for acoustics. This is what our measurements say. This is our little microphone. And we have a loudspeaker on the stage. And we spend the night there. And there's someone whose job is to lock all the doors and make sure the builders don't come back with their power drill because they're very late. This was for my talk to the acousticians, but do you remember that long tables of parameters that I showed that was part of the brief? We got a tick. I can't give you the real numbers because the client doesn't have them yet. So if you have them before then you'll be unfair. But they have them at the end of October. So there we go. So we got the tick on every aspect of it. That's it. Reviews. Because acoustic is quite a subjective thing, even though we can quantify it. The latest one is, I put that just in case someone's interested in going to London to try to build a new concert hall in London.
Never.
Tom Service from The Guardian was actually really kind to us. But most riveting was Simon Rattle's review. Simon Rattle is the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonie. He's probably the most popular conductor of symphonic music at the moment, and he's moving to London. And he wants to build a new concert hall. And Simon Rattle he's the one who said it believes with the Music Verein, the Berlin Philharmonie, the Concert Gibbon, the Boston Symphonic Hall. Now there's also Paris. So we tick that part of the brief. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Very interesting. So now it's time for questions. So to ask something to Thomas, please do. Okay, not be no questions.
I have one question. You mentioned that the attendance was almost full, so that works with your program for the banners. But what if a show is only half sold? Are you going to use the banners?
Yes.
Yeah. During the show?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually also have some that are here, from that point here, inside the inner volume as well. So yeah, we use it. In fact, we were there in April to try to find out how much banners you need to deploy for different situations. So yes.
Two questions. Around the orchestra, can you, did you need absorption in the walls around the orchestra? Or are they all hard surfaces?
These walls are fully hard. On that, we have more little blocks of wood though. We have high diffusion. The rear wall here has open screen, so it's buttons, 50% open, and there's a curtain that can run all the way. It's actually many curtains. There's bits of curtains for 2 meters. Sometimes you have a big percussion that would be right here, and they're too close to a sound reflecting wall. So you might just bring 2 meters of curtain right behind that guy. This is too loud. We found that they actually use it for piano recital, and they draw the entire curtain in the back. Or some orchestra, see the stage here is flat. When New York Philharmonie played, they wanted this flat stage. And that meant that the wall here got much taller, so we drew the curtains.
The chairs for a concert hall usually want more hard surface chair, but I see that it has this big upholstery in the back.
Yes.
Is that an issue for you?
Yeah, it was an issue. Yeah. Jean Nouvel said, "I want the seat to look like a teddy bear." Literally, he said, "I want people to sit in a big, like a giant teddy bear, and they feel good, and it's like a homie." So they're very round and they're very thick, and they have a very thick fabric on top. But you can make the shape with polystyrene inside, and just keep the absorption and high frequency of the fabric. But inside actually is not foam. You just have enough foam for the comfort, control the absorption, but the rest is either a plywood empty box or polystyrene blocks. It took us a year to sort out the seats and 4 trips to have meetings about the seats. So they're 900 euros a piece. So there's I don't know if you noticed, but there are different colors of seats as well. Maybe I could pull out a photo of the whole without the audience. I can do that. Yeah. There's 9 different colors for the seats. So, because you need spares for seats, and you have 2,400 seats, I can't show you that at some point. They have 800 spare seats. The seats come in different widths so that the eyes are all lined up. Different colors of fabric means different colors of timber. All the parts down in timber. And so 2,400 seats, and you have 800 spares. It's quite an expensive exercise when they cost 900 euros each.
Thomas, thanks for a terrific presentation. Congratulations. Can you talk through the construction cost?
I have a slide for it. Can I access the slide?
Are you allowed to tell us the number?
Oh yeah, the numbers are well known. The numbers, there's all sorts of numbers. Yes, thank you. Oh, I missed my slide. Here we go. Project numbers. Where is it? Yeah. Here we go.
Okay.
100,000 square, 38,000 euros per square meter.
The original budget was set arbitrarily very low at the very beginning. None of the 6 teams met the budget. Some teams didn't put their real budget. Massage a bit the numbers. So yeah, so it's gone officially. The original number in 2007 was 120 million. The tender, it was costed at 280. And at the end of the project, it was 384. It's not a cheap architecture. It's not a cheap, but it's not a cheap brief at all. And if there's one place where sometimes the government gets behind a project, a cultural project like that, then Paris was the best place to do it.
You have the construction period of 4 years. How long was the design process? I know it maybe ends at the end, but before you went to tender.
Before we went to tender, we won it in January 2007, and we went for tender in June 2008. There was a short period of design. It went for tender very quickly because of the political climate at a specific time. And then the 2008 global financial crisis came, and as everyone was firing everyone in France, that's when the tender came back as more than twice the budget. So actually the project was put on hold. The warranty of the walls, retention walls on site, which had been dug already, the warranty expired, so someone had to come back and redo the wall excavation. And then eventually, 2 years later, the construction began.
How confident were you that it was going to sound great before hearing it? And what was the one thing that you were most worried about not working with there was one?
We spent, we won in 2007. We had worked for 6 months on the competition before, and it opened in 2015. And so I spent literally days, you can ask my wife, I spent too much time in that design. At the end of it, we were pretty confident that it would sound good. We were actually quite confident. We had done all the studies that we possibly could. We had a scale model. We had no reason not to be. There was one aspect we were slightly concerned about, was the loudness, the natural loudness, because it's at such a large volume. The quantity of energy emitted by an instrument on the stage is limited, and when you send an energy into a big volume, it does like a gas, it just expands, and that means like anyone who's in that volume gets a little bit less of the gas, gets a little bit less of the loudness of the energy of the sound. So our biggest concern was actually the loudness, and that meant we were really painful to the builders on site that they meet our specifications for the materials. We wanted roughly 50 mil of timber or plaster inside so that it doesn't absorb sound, so we don't lose any of that precious energy more than is absolutely necessary.
Tom, with the level of precision and the sophistication of the acoustics, right? What's the relevance of actually building a 1 to 10 scale model and actually obtaining some data?
There's no relevance. We recommended a model because when you do a completely new typology, it's good to have a model. But an acoustic model, to be useful for the acoustic design, only needs to be 1 to 20. 1 to 25. Yeah. But the client saw an opportunity to have a very big marketing object, and so went for the 1 to 10. It costed €1 million.
What? €1 million?
Yeah, it was manufactured in Germany on CNC machines.
So did the client have an acoustician advising them to do that as well?
There was. The client had a full design team on their side as well.
So there was an acoustician telling them to do the modelling?
Yes, the acoustician who wrote the brief. And he stayed on the project till the end.
Can I be curious?
Too much.
Can you tell us where is your ideas coming from? I'm very interested about the thing about the clarity and the reverberations. to me, it sounds like almost like a loudspeaker's design. When I'm reading some, I do not know whether you know, there is a loudspeaker called PMC. They have for the bass, they have a transmission line that reverb, like your outer shell, it reverb and then make the bass to be more powerful. And then the tweeter, the high pitch sound speaker, and then they have a board in the front and how it reflects and then make the clarity more higher to the people when they perceive it. Is it coming from that kind of thing? Because when I was in the school, when the teacher's telling us that the acoustic design is about reflector, absorption at the back, and that's it. And then you now put in some reflector closer to the ear to reflect to the ears, and then putting some space behind and then reverb. Where is your idea coming from?
Oh.
And then, my other question is that if you have the next time to do another acoustically designed theater, and then what other thing you think you can also pursue to further improve?
To start with, there's no real solution to acoustic that you should apply to every project. It's not a linear exercise, and it's not a linear. It's an exercise in design, which is supported by science and engineering. So, our role is not to have a solution that you apply. It is to react to a context and do a design and support the design with science. So we constantly go from the linear part of engineering and science, and then we reach out to the non-linear realm of the project, which is architecture, design, politics, budgets, all of that. And we keep doing that. We know we want clarity, and we know where it comes from. It comes from early lateral reflections. We know we want reverberation, and it comes from big volume. So we put reflector in the middle of a big volume, and you get both. It's a pretty simple concept. I didn't invent it. Harold worked it out. Marshall was actually historically, he's the person who actually explained why the Berlin Philharmonie was such a success. It was an accident of design, mixed with a great intuition from the architect. But someone had to explain it from a scientific point of view, and he said, well, the clarity comes from these early lateral reflections. And so since then, we've just been obsessed with lateral reflections. But the way you do it varies from one project to the other. It's a context, it's the architect you're working on, it's the client's expectations and inspiration.
Sorry, somebody else. Go ahead, please.
Oh, no, Thomas, thank you. That was absolutely tremendous. It's a fantastic space. Can we look forward to a similar acoustic performance here in Hong Kong?
I'd love to. It's funny you say that. I'm working really hard. We're doing the Lyric Theatre in Hong Kong and the Free Space on the West Kowloon. I'm trying really hard to get a concert hall project here so we can actually demonstrate what is good acoustics in Hong Kong. I don't have the 384 million euros to spend myself. I'd love to.
Then how's that compared to the Guangzhou Opera House? Like, comparison to the sound and project?
Well, it's built on the same principle. It's just built with a different architect, applying exactly this principle I just said, clarity.
And just go to Guangzhou and find out if there's...
No. Paris has a very different voice. Guangzhou, everyone looks forward towards the prosceniums. Sound comes from fixed directions. In Paris, you're sitting in a balcony that surrounds the stage, and there's a gap above and below that balcony from which the reverberation comes from all directions. So the envelopment is very, very different. And in many ways, and it's not because I prefer symphony to opera, but it's a much more immersive experience in Paris.
My question was more technical again. You hear of sound labs, and so simulations of spaces to modeling computer modeling.
Mhm.
What is your opinion on the technology and the ability to get some kind of, for the layperson or the client, whatever, to get some impression of the acoustic quality using these kinds of technologies?
So it's called oralization. Yeah, it's about simulating and then listening to the result outcome of a simulation. So you can play a dry recording of the music through the computer. Computer calculate what it should sound like in the room, and then you just listen to it on a headphone or an expensive display with expensive loudspeakers. We don't do that. The reason is the simulations are only as accurate as your 3D model is, and it does not necessarily include all the details of the constructions, because you assign materials to your 3D model. It's like, you know, it's like building a schedule of finishes. You don't necessarily have the real information of what happens at low frequencies. Computer simulations don't exist for rooms at low frequencies. No one can accurately predict what happens below 500 hertz. And 500, there's a lot of instruments that play below 500 hertz. So it is, in our opinion, misleading to tell a client you can listen to the room before it's built, because you're never going to listen to the room. What you're going to be able to do with these is oralization, is to say, here client, I've suggested that change. Here's how it would sound with and without the change that I'm suggesting. And it's a relative scale, but it is certainly not an absolute scale. And I would certainly not mislead the client in promising that. I'd rather, if we have, because that costs $500,000 to actually do these simulations that the client pays, I'd rather we actually do a 1:25 scale model, and he could see and he could visualize the changes as well. And it's not just the acoustician benefits, but it's the architect. We raised the ceiling by 1 meter after the construction of the 1:10 model, the physical model. It had nothing to do with acoustics. It's just when Jean Nouvel went in, he said the ceiling's too low. Because 1:10, you really start having a feel for the space. You can't do that on a computer screen.
So, on that note, how much of the acoustic science do you think is subjective? And if it is, then how do you cater for that?
Okay. The appreciation of music is subjective, but since the 30s and onward, people have started to find ways to quantify the preferences for music. Meaning, people like when the sound is clear, and I like hearing all the work from the violinist. Someone has worked out a parameter that you can measure and quantify called clarity, called definition. It's what musicians talk a lot about, these descriptive, when they say the timbre, the warmth. You know, when they talk about these subjective things, everyone understands what they are. Acousticians have the same set of vocabulary that describe quantities that you can quantify. Just like, you know, do, re, mi, fa, sol. Everyone in the music industry understands what you're talking about when you say no. It's the same thing for acoustics. Once you quantify that, then you can start working back into the science, linear science world, to achieve these parameters. But reaching these parameters is by no means a guarantee of great acoustics. It is only an insurance that you haven't done the biggest mistake of your life. And then you need to go to the other level, and the other level is just experience. There's no training for acousticians per se. There's no one who can tell you what's the best acoustic in the world, because it doesn't exist. There's no best acoustic or poor acoustic, just like this. Who's the best opera singer in the world? What's the best voice in the world? Everyone has a different opinion. And I'm pretty sure the top 20 singers that anyone would name are actually great singers. They just may be better at one repertoire than they are another. Same thing for room. So we go to the level. It ticks the client's box, he has simulations, we validate the model. But sometimes you have the good numbers and you still know you're wrong. The room is wrong and you still need to work on it. And you can't figure that out without the experience. So for me personally, it's about going to concerts and thinking a lot about architecture, so that I can link what I hear with what I see.
But what you think is good acoustic might not be good for me. So how do you think that?
Yeah, the people who've defined these values, they haven't done it for themselves. They've done it with a bunch of musicians, bunch of experts, listeners, and they are results from statistical things. Okay, so same thing. Like, you know, not everyone likes French fries, but pretty much any restaurants who wants to do Western will have French fries, because statistically, you know, it's kind of like something you're guaranteed to sell. In a way, it's a bit like that. And there are still people who prefer one concert hall to another, and they're both excellent, but one prefers that A because it's got more clarity. I like clarity, so I tend to prefer the halls that are a little bit on the bright side. We know North America prefers a lot of warmth in the reverberation and maybe less clarity. In mainland and the Japanese, they really like very high clarity, almost very little reverberation. Usually that comes from background of their own music, you know, from an historical point of view. And you know, there's the vernacular architecture that still exists in the way they design their own places. So you have to put it into context. And it's clear that when we design a venue in mainland, we don't design it the same way that we would in Paris and Australia.
You said that the client has provided a very detailed, thick brief to you.
Yes.
Do you think you have fully matched the brief, every aspect of the brief?
Oh, I'm sure out of the 65 pages, there might be a couple of points that we missed out. In some places, you miss out because the brief, and I take it from the acoustician who wrote it, was not the brief of a concert hall, it was the brief of the best possible concert hall he could think of. And he admitted after the competition that it was a challenge to the acoustic community to try to find someone who would go and try to achieve that. So he knows there are a couple of points where we've missed out on the brief. But when you're in the room, you can hear that it's a really good room. And the purpose of a brief is not so much to set a list of tick box for someone with a spreadsheet. It's to set a standard and an objective for high quality, or define the level of quality that you want. So we meet the brief in general. We certainly meet the intent, and we meet the fit for purpose that's defining the brief. The client's very happy, and his acoustician is over the moon, and he's trying to take maybe a bit more credit than he should on the design.
And some people said that the shoebox design should guarantee the best acoustic. So do you think your concert hall is as good as a shoebox design or better than shoebox?
I think it's better.
You think it's better?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the other way around. You know, like the shoebox is it's an old school design. Nothing wrong with old school conservative design. If you have a client who doesn't want to take risk, and you've got an architect who doesn't want to take that risk either, who's not specifically inspired, then yeah, fair enough, you go for it. It's cheaper to build. And you know, you get a big fee and you don't do half of the work. So everyone's happy. But a shoebox is really hard to bring to the 21st century. There's only so much you can do in a shoebox. It's really hard to put a choir in a shoebox. It's really hard to get a very large volume so that it works for an organ. The organ in the Philharmonie of Paris is the biggest organ in France now. It's 119 stops. It is just, you know, short of the organ of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And he only works because by flattening the parterre, the stalls, completely, getting rid of the choir completely, so that the choir is actually at stage level instead of being perched up, we can get to 3.4 second reverberation and still sell 1,300 tickets, which is plenty for organ concerts. No shoebox can have that flexibility. So, and today's concert hall, the concert halls that survive are the ones that actually are able to do all the things and varied things. So, from an acoustic point of view, yes, the shoebox is a safe thing. It's not necessarily the best, but it's a safe thing. But from an economical business point of view of any venue, it's shooting yourself in the foot.
All right. We can talk a bit more. On behalf of PRC Magazine and Marc Chantal, we thank you for coming here. There'll be 2 more talks, one on place branding and wayfinding and one on landscape design in the coming 2 months. So we will be all invited. You can pass the word for those who are interested. I hope that Thomas' talk was nice and informative. He's a definitely very inspiring person. What I really like is his passion and also the passion they managed to communicate to the architect and the vice versa, that kind of synergy that makes a group of people, consultants, clients, to lead forward a very good outcome, which is not necessarily happening in all projects. One of the reasons why Thomas started the series of talks is because they managed to achieve that with the concept. Thank you, Thomas.